Alrighty, so in the last video we covered our lights and lasers. Now we want to go through and actually start working on, well, covering up these sights. So to start off with, we're going to work with red dots and reflex sights and all that kind of stuff, and hollow, whatever you want, and because they're all going to be under the same class, and set this up. So what all options and how do we use this? So let's start off with the basics of how do you set this up to aim with it. Again, just like all the other aimable parts, you set this up using an aim socket. So if I click on the mesh and let's go ahead and look at it, we have a socket here called S_aim that's placed right in front or right in the center of the glass. And that's our aim point. Now when we go back to it, we make sure the socket aim is the same, make sure is aimable is checked, which it is by default. You're going to want to set this part type to sight, which again is done by default. Ignore the pose collision. I seriously have no idea why that's even there. And then we have a bunch of other settings. So we have, again, the default part stats and the part data, but we have a lot of new stuff right here. So first thing you'll see is the camera field of view zoom. So right now that is at 10. Let me actually disable the reticle brightness settings as well. So we have the camera field of view zoom at 10. Let me go to a map where you can actually see what's going on. So when I go through and aim, as you can see, the camera zooms in just a little bit. Now, if I want to crank that up, what I can do is I can bump this up to 40, and that'll make it excessive. So now, as you can see, I'm zooming in quite a bit. So this would almost be something that you would want to set up is if you are not using render target scopes. So if you're using like some type of just masked scope or something like that, you would want to really do something like this and just, you could crank it up to like, this is going to be very, very excessive, but like 100. That's might be a little bit excessive here. Let's try like 80, but you would have it cranked up at a pretty high value. So as you can see, we go in, when we aim, we can see pretty far. And that is the other thing that happens when you deal with that. So the side effect is your mouse movement is now a lot slower. So that's kind of a good thing. So it takes much less or much more movement to move from corner to corner when you're aiming. Like I'm using triple the movement here at least. So that's what that setting does. Then we have the speed of it. So obviously that controls the speed. So if I bump this up to like 50, we should be able to zoom in pretty fast. So as you can see, the camera zooms in almost immediately before the sight even gets there. So I'm going to turn these back down to default. And as you can see, we just have a subtle increase there. And I can even just set it to 0 if I really don't want to have that at all, like that. So let me revert that back to default. All right, the next thing is the camera distance. So how far we want the camera to be away from the optic. So right now it's at 10. So not necessarily like how far away from the optic, but kind of the added distance, so to speak. So it's at 10. Let's start at 0 here. When I aim, the camera is right at the kind of the base of the charging handle. Let me bump this up to 50. I really don't remember using that either. Yeah, so I'm gonna have to get rid of that because I've ended up redoing the system so the camera distance is dynamic. That's right. So ignore the camera distance. So next up, let me mark that down to change real quick. Alrighty, I wrote that down in the to-do. As you can assume, this is early access to the plugin. It's still kind of a work in progress, but for the most part, the foundation is there and it's pretty good. There is some minor issues and those are going to be worked out periodically as I go through, tune the system and try to make it just a lot more robust. All right, so moving on to reticles. So currently when I aim, as you can see, I have just the normal holographic sight reticle, kind of like the EOTech style that I went ahead and made up in GIMP. I can set this up so I can cycle through several of them. So let's start with the 0. So if I wanted to, I could go through and I could add, let's see, let's search for reticle. We have EOTech, we have red dot, and I have one for the crappy triangle. So now when I aim, I still have the EOTech, I press M, I go to the red dot, press M again, and I go to the triangle. So these are all, obviously, you can settable. You cycle through them. Now the next thing This is actually set up kind of in an order as well. So if I were to change this to the red dot first, when you go through and you aim, you're on the red dot. So this overrides that initial reticle that is used in the optic, which in this case would be the EOTech. All right, so next up, the reticle brightness settings. So this is what you saw me using earlier, and as well as in the night vision stuff like that, as I have a very low value, so you can just barely see it when looking through night vision, but not with the naked eye. So starting at 0, we can have off, then we'll have 0.8, and then I guess we'll just bump it up to 1. And I'll leave the reticle default brightness set to 0, so it's going to start out off. So when I aim, as you can see, it is off. I press O, it increases. I press O again, it increases more. So I go back down, back up, back down, and so on. This is currently bugged when you switch optics. I have a system in place, well, in my mind anyways, on how I can go through and make this again more robust for the reticles themselves. So if I turn this off, press M, as you can see, I am no longer having that off brightness, and I can no longer adjust it either because I'm at that, it's maxed out when it was never really finished being set. So again, I know how to go through and fix this. I just got to go through and do it because it's going to require a little bit of a rewrite for how the reticle system works. All right, next up, we have the reticle material index. So this is depending on your mesh. So if I head over to my static mesh here, you can see I have 2 materials for it. One is for the housing itself, and then the other one is for the glass. So where you see that EOTech reticle. So that is at element 1. So that means I want to make sure I set the reticle material index at 1. If it was this one instead, I would want to set it at 0. So this is depending on your mesh. All right, as I said before, we have all the default stuff and all that. Now let's go ahead and take a look at our material instances. So we head over here, we have assets, reticles, material instances, and then all of our red dots. So here's that set site test for the, for this render target scopes and all that. But here's our settings here. So let's actually place down let's place down the reflex site so we can actually see what's going on the fly. Bring that up. Okay. Get a little closer. So here's our current, site. Yeah, close enough. So as I go through, and hopefully it does it live, I think it will, we can change out the settings. So the way this works is I am using the red, green, and blue channels to define the reticle. So if you want to make your own reticle, that's how you would go through and do it. So for example, this EOTech, the outer ring is red and the inner dots are green. So that means if I want to change the outer ring color, that would be changing the red channel. If I want to change the 2 dots, that would be changing the green channel because those are green by default. So if I want to make the outer ring red, I just go over here to the red channel color, or sorry, not red, but I want to make it blue. I drag it over to blue, and it is now blue. So that's how you tune that, and same thing for the green. You can make that green, red, blue, whatever you want. Now you have a bunch of different ones here. So here's an example where I'm using all 3. So like the ACSS one that I tried to make and did a very bad job, I have a bunch of different colors here. I have red, green, and blue. So you can change the chevron color, the horseshoe color. Then you can also change all the dots and the numbers and the scale here for gauging the distance. And you could change the color of the inner line. So that's how all that gets tuned. So we also have a couple other things. So we have the bump offset, which honestly, I would leave there at that value. But we have the emissive intensity. So currently, the 2 dots right there, those are set to 1. They're not emissive at all. If I bump it up, as you can see, they glow more and more. And I have it capped out at 500, but you can really crank that up to something absurd if you really wanted to. But you're probably not going to see much of a difference in daylight. But if you're using my night vision magnifier behind it, long story short, even these values here, those are going to be, they're going to be blinding, to put it simply. So you're not really going to want to have much emissiveness. That's why I added the brightness setting, so you could tune and set whichever ones that are going to work with night vision to have night vision brightness settings. So I'm going to leave that the same. Again, you can crank up however you wish and suits you. So next up, obviously the reticle. Which reticle do you want? So I can throw on the ACSS. Oh, that is a good point. I need to actually clamp this. So when you import your reticles, so like you drag this new texture in here, you want to make sure your x-axis and y-axis tiling method are clamped like that, and then save it. So that way it does not tile. So then we have the reticle size, so I need to bump that up so I can see it better. But as you can see here, I currently have the blue and red kind of set up that way. So if I change the red channel, I now have a green chevron with a red hash marks and blue everything else. So I can lower the intensity. As you can see, the bigger the area, the more it gets. So that's way more than the EOTech for what it was, for example. So we can leave that to where it's non-emissive, turn it off if we want it to be black. Set that back to 100. Then we have the green emissive. So again, that's for your inner ring there. So we can turn that all the way off however we want. Change the color to whatever we want. Like I'll do a pinkish purple. And then our blue channel, which is everything else around the outside. So I can make that whatever I wish. So I'll just kind of leave it a purple. So there's your new reticle. You have just customized it. You can change the colors on the fly however you wish. Then we can go through, change the brightness, which kind of affects it as a whole. So as you can see, that got that got a little excessive. So you're really going to want to leave that kind of at some sort of default. So I leave mine at a default of 1 and control it through the emissive. And you can just leave it kind of all the same. So I'm going to put this back as the EOTech because that's, well, the one that I am using. And I want to change the colors back to red and red. And then I'll just get NASCAR. I'll set it at 100 and 100. And I don't think it was that big. I think I had it set to like 5, 6, I don't know, something like that. So that's how the reticles work for the red dots. Now I also have reticles for different things. Obviously we have our night vision and thermals. We have our magnifiers. We have the other red dots, and that's all kind of the same concept. They're just a little bit more in depth because they are meant to be used for magnified optics. So again, we also have parallax. So for example, if I want to move this sucker up here to where we are lined up with this corner, you can do so. And then as you move around, as you can see, the reticle stays on the corner. So it has a little bit of movement, so the parallax is not that great. If I wanted to make it stay more in place, I would just decrease that bump offset value. But again, we have simulated parallax. This is not something you're probably going to notice in gameplay at all, so it's not really a concern. But you could move that back farther to the point of it not moving, and you would be good to go. Okay, now that we have all that out of the way, let's see, what are we going to do next? So we have our reflex sight done. Let's discuss the default magnifier. So that's what we're going to handle in the next video. So I will see you then.